Good morning, and thank you to everyone who's just signing in and joining us. We'll get started in a moment, but if you can please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat box with your name and institution. We love to see who has joined the meeting and looking forward to getting started shortly. Sandy, no April Fool's jokes during this meeting. We're wishing everyone a smooth meeting with no April Fools. Good morning. Great to see folks joining in. If you can please just take a moment and introduce yourself with name and institution in the chat. Great to see who's here, and we will get started momentarily. Wonderful to see everyone logging in this morning. And I think we'll go ahead and get started. And please continue introducing yourselves in the chat if you haven't had a chance to yet. It's terrific for us to see who's able to join today. And feel free to use the chat throughout the presentation to have conversations, to ask questions, etc. We'll make sure that somebody is always watching the chat and get to your questions either in real time or later in the conversation at the Q&A if possible. So again, for those who are less familiar with WebEx, see the chat icon down on the bottom and feel free to, again, use the chat bar. And finally, please also keep yourself on mute if you are not speaking. Thank you so much. And on behalf of JFF and Wheelhouse, we're very excited to get started with our event on dual enrollment for special populations. And I have the pleasure of turning it over to Joel Vargas, our Vice President from JFF, to get us going today.
Thanks, Sarah. Can you hear me? Okay, just always want to make sure. I'm Joel Vargas. I'm Vice President of Programs at JFF, and it's my privilege to welcome you today to our discussion about dual enrollment for special populations. So first, I want to thank you by taking time out of your busy day to come and join us on yet another, well, technically WebEx, I was going to say Zoom call, but just also to really express our appreciation today to our partners at UC Davis's Wheelhouse Center for co-hosting this event with us and for their partnership on all the research. So just a word here on this slide about JFF and our interest in this topic. You can see our mission is that we really want to increase economic advancement for everyone in the country by aligning and transforming our workforce and education systems. And we've long seen dual enrollment as a powerful tool, lever, and if you will, like a lens for creating stronger transitions and paths between high school to and through college and careers. And it's one that's especially potentially so for students traditionally underserved and who are more apt to fall through the transition points in those systems. So I would dare say the research supports that statement and our advocacy. So before I say more, could we just go to the next slide, please? Great, thanks. let's just want to say a word about what you can expect today in terms of our agenda. I'm going to just say a few more words momentarily about why this moment is particularly a timely one for digging into these issues. And then we're going to ask our colleagues from Wheelhouse to highlight important new data that they've analyzed about current participation rates of special populations in dual enrollment in California. And then my colleagues at JFF will share what we've learned over the past several months about the kinds of practices that can increase access and success for students in dual enrollment, these students in dual enrollment. And then we have the good fortune today to be joined by, and with much gratitude, we'll hear from Dr. Aisha Lowe, Vice Chancellor from the California Community College System, about her perspective on the findings and implications for connections to how she and her colleagues are thinking about dual enrollment's role in the big transformations that the system is currently undertaking writ large. So we really thank her for being here and looking forward to her remarks. Then we'll have some time for questions and discussion. Next slide, please. Right, so I won't spend too much time here. Hopefully you can all see this slide, but the data here speak to the need for our systems to better serve English learners, students with disabilities, and homeless and foster youth. Their rates of, just picking a couple of data points that are pertinent here, but the rates of high school graduation are notably lower than for all students, and their rates of college and career readiness are even more notably lower in comparison to all students. Let's take a look at the next slide, please. Great. And research has shown that dual enrollment holds promise as a strategy for addressing these kinds of gaps. It's shown that dual enrollment participation is positively associated with graduation from high school, college enrollment, and college completion. And the effects hold true for other underserved populations, such as low-income youth, Black and Latinx students, males, and students with lower GPAs. So given this, we wanted to understand in this research how to open more doors to dual enrollment, not only for these students, but also special populations who would be likely to similarly benefit, even though they have a unique set of needs. Next slide, please. So this is a quotation from a student, an English learner from one of the districts we spoke to for our inquiry. And they're expressing an experience which is really resonant with what we hear nationally from other high school students taking college courses. And I love this line. I'll just excerpt it. At first I felt weird about it, that is taking dual enrollment, but then you'll get used to it because that's what you'll be, a college student. And I love that line because it really indicates the positive shift in identity development and confidence to learn at a higher level, which really bodes well for getting the momentum that you need to succeed in college. Next slide, please. And so finally here, this is where I'll end. They're a complementary, if not confluent, set of conditions that we think make the time right for making advances in strengthening college access and success through dual enrollment strategies. For one, it's been 5 years since the legislature passed AB 288, fondly known as CCAP, or maybe not so fondly known if you have to fill out all those forms, but it was really a turning point for dual enrollment in California. And CCAP stands for College and Career Access Pathways. It's a time, that 5-year period, it corresponded with pretty incredible growth in dual enrollment in the state. So it was probably prompted, I dare say, by that legislation. I think the relationship is causal there. And the legislature at this point is due to check in as per the law. They set it out for themselves to check in and see about the progress being made at this important milestone. Also, the Governor's Council on Post-Secondary Education, the Task Force on Recovery with Equity, recently issued a report, and one of the recommendations, among several others, but not the whole universe of things you could do were in there. They were very strategic, and dual enrollment was one recommended strategy in that report. And it's clearly dual enrollment is aligned with priorities of our education systems for closing equity gaps and increasing educational attainment. So The K-12 CDE accountability dashboard has dual enrollment as an indicator. Clearly this kind of work is consonant with the, not to speak for Dr. Lowe, but it's consonant with the Chancellor's vision for success. If you take a look at, if you do those things well, you can help, it would help contribute to the vision for success. So finally, I would just add, I don't think this is even on the slide, but we've been thinking about this lately and put in a plug to have you think about it. The federal stimulus is going to provide states, districts, and institutions of higher ed around the country, and in California included, with a lot of funding to spend in a relatively short amount of time to compensate for learning loss from COVID. So without going into detail here, we have people at JFF who know the detail, and they tell me our read of the rules is that there's a lot of latitude in how the stimulus can be spent, how those dollars can be used on strategies to address learning loss. And we recommend that dual enrollment should be at least one among those strategies that states, high schools, and colleges use in this time of great need and opportunity. So I will leave you with that, and looking forward to the discussion today. And I have the great pleasure of turning it over now to my colleague from UC Davis Wheelhouse, Nicole Kurlander. Hi, Nicole.
Good morning. Thank you, Joel. Thank you, JFF, and thank you, everyone. It's great to see so many familiar names and faces. So I'm Nicole Kurlander, here representing Wheelhouse, the Center for Community College Leadership and Research at UC Davis, and PACE, which we collaborate with on this important work. I'll just start by saying what I loved about that quote from that student and why we think this is such a promising policy and practice direction for the state is because it represents what we know from research on dual enrollment, which is that sort of three key ingredients that we know are important for success in college are increasing academic preparation, information about what it takes to be successful in college, and momentum. And that quote kind of represented all three of those key ingredients that we know are key determinants for success in college persistence and attainment. So we have begun this work along with other great folks on this call. So there's great momentum within even just the research community and policy community and advocacy community on this topic. And so I'm going to talk today about a companion, both a report and an update that we did to that report, looking at some special populations and overall trends, along with give you a teaser about some new work we're doing, ongoing work we're doing on equity and dual enrollment opportunities. I'm joined here, not visually, but here with me is my colleague Sherry Reed, who will interject if there's anything I'm missing or forgetting, or if my video goes out. And also, I believe our colleague, grad student who's been working with us on this topic, Joanna Matthias is here. This work is done with her in collaboration along with two folks, Alice Lee and Michelle Gross. So thanks in advance for their help. And we can go ahead and advance the slides. So what did we undertake several years ago? So we, through a partnership we have with the California Department of Education to understand college preparation and alignment of K-12 to college more generally, for several years now, funded by the Institute for Education Sciences, is to look at the question of students' transitions into college. And so what we did was we were trying to understand a number of things, among them participation in community colleges. And so as many of on this WebEx know, we still do not yet, but hopefully soon we'll have a longitudinal data system. And so what we did is we built one ourselves, basically. And so we matched several cohorts of California high school students using the cohorts of the College Career Readiness Indicator, the CCI. So we looked at 4 cohorts of 12th graders that were enrolled in California public high schools and tried to identify their course taking patterns at community colleges. So keep in mind, we're going to use different words here, and we're happy to define, and Sherry will help me define it in chat. We're going to first think about dual enrollment in the broadest sense, and that is students participating in community college classes. And that's not to say there isn't college opportunities outside of the California community college system. There are. We're going to focus on California community colleges where the bulk of dual enrollment happens, right? So CSU has some, and there are other ways you might participate in online course taking or something like that, private institutions or out-of-state institutions, but we're focusing on California community colleges. So we're going to look at these cohorts and we're going to identify their participation before they graduated high school. So we're going to give them a chance to take community college courses throughout their 4 years prior to graduation. So we match them to the California Community College Chancellor's Office data. Again, we've had a over a decade-long partnership with the California Community College Chancellor's Office on a number of questions related to college persistence and success. And here's what we learned. So again, this is a companion piece, and Sherry will put in the chat where you can find both of these pieces. But what we learned is that dual enrollment participation is growing over time, right? And so the percent of high school students who take community college classes while they're still in high school has grown over time. So slightly less than 1 in 5 California public high school students is participating in community college courses in some form before they graduate high school. We also learn, go ahead, you can turn to the next slide, that there are a lot of disparities in this participation. So in A Rising Tide, in an infographic, the companion piece that went with A Leg Up on College, we learned that there are increases across the board in all groups, but that there continue to be disparities in participation by race ethnicity. In particular, we see Asian students are much more likely, right, over a quarter of Asian students are participating in community college courses before they graduate from high school. And we see those numbers significantly lower for other groups, particularly for Black and Latinx students. So note that all students are seeing an increase over time, but that the disparities do not seem to be attenuated, at least not obviously. Now I'm going to complicate this statistic a little bit further in our newer work, where you'll see we're actually trying to hone in on types of community college participation. But since we've advanced, let me just go to some of the other subgroups we look at. So we look at socioeconomically disadvantaged students, English learners, foster youth, homeless youth, and we also, not in this graph, but in the other work we did jointly with JFF, we also look at students with disabilities. So they're not listed here. Slightly less than 10% of students with disabilities in our most current statistics are participating. So you'll note all of these numbers are significantly lower than the 18.2% that we see overall, and in particular for some subgroups. And so we continue to focus on the disparities by a variety of categories and access to this important opportunity that we were just describing. We do have a line there to represent when AB 288 went into effect. Keep in mind, this is not causal yet. We are doing some more analytic work to understand, did the introduction of AB 288 sort of facilitate the more rapid growth of this opportunity? But for now, it really is just a descriptive look at what we're seeing over time, with a strong suggestion, as Joel said, that this legislation did absolutely accelerate participation for high schools and community colleges. Okay, I'm going to turn, and you'll stop me if I've gone over time, but I'm going to please, this is new work. It's in progress, so we're asking you, it's preliminary. And so it's not out yet, so please not to cite. You're welcome to ask us a lot of questions as we kind of cross the T's and dot the I's on this emerging work. Go ahead, we can go ahead. So the first thing we wanted to do in the next iteration of this investigation is to better understand what we mean by dual enrollment. So we're very careful in the first report to suggest that here we just mean any community college participation. And many of us either ourselves or know of stories of the students who just really wanted to take the sign language class or a more advanced math class than what was offered at their high school, and went on their own searching for that class at their local community college. We want to distinguish those. That's an important type of opportunity. We want to keep that in the mix, but we also want to distinguish that from more formal dual enrollment opportunities. That is, courses that are constructed through CCAP or other forms even before AB 288 between a high school and a community college. So we're going to leverage a lot of data work to try to distinguish these more formal dual enrollment. It's in quotes because we can have lots of conversations around how to categorize this. For now, just think of it as these structured courses that were built precisely for high school classes to be taking as a class, a community college course, whether it's on their high school campus or their community campus or online. And what we learned so far is that approximately a third of that community, oops, can we go back for just a second? Is that about a third of those community college course taking that I described overall. So think of that, a third of that 18.2% of students, their classes, a third is really that formal dual enrollment participation. not purposely not giving an exact number there, but you can think about a third. So how do we think about the distribution of those one-off or two-off classes compared to the formal? We know that Latinx students are more heavily represented in the formal dual enrollment opportunities. And so they're much more underrepresented in those individual course taking that I described than in the formal. With the Asian students, it's the exact reverse. So we see Asian students are underrepresented in the more formal dual enrollment and overrepresented in the individual course taking. And for white and African-American students, it's roughly the same. That's sort of the sort of the distribution of their representation seems to be this roughly equivalent parity between formal and non-formal. And the other thing that we're trying to unpack, go ahead and you can advance for me, thank you. Oops. Is where, who are the sending high schools to these more formal dual enrollment opportunities and the receiving community colleges. So really quickly, because I'm sure I'm running out of time, this is just the distribution of schools that have classes that are in that more formal dual enrollment. And you can go ahead and animate the next slide. You'll see about 40 schools have 50% of their cohorts enrolling in a more formal dual enrollment opportunity. And we are trying to understand something about those schools. They range from charter, public, size, all different size. In the interest of time, I'm gonna not, you'll have to stay tuned on our reports on that. Go ahead and you can advance to the next slide. Importantly, we're also, those formal dual enrollment opportunities are plotted here against the varying proportions of schools serving socioeconomic disadvantaged students. And so what you see is the range, the percent of the grad cohort that is by school that is identified as socioeconomic disadvantage, and the percent of the grads of that cohort that are participating in formal dual enrollment. So if you kind of look at the scatter above, you'll see that those dots that are scattered above the 40% y-axis line, you'll see there, those are the schools that have significant numbers of their students participating in formal dual enrollment. And the main thing we wanted to show you here is that is a range of all types of schools, high concentrated poverty schools and less so, right? So we see a variety of types of school characteristics that are offering this formal dual enrollment. And finally, this is the distribution of community colleges. And so these are college on the x-axis. There's 115 represented here. And the size of the bubble represents the size of their overall enrollment. And on the y-axis is the percent of their what's called their special admits. These are high school students who are taking formal dual enrollment classes. And so you'll see there's the range from colleges that are serving very few formal dual enrollment, if not zero, and some that have 80% of their special admit population or their their high school population is in a formal dual enrollment. And again, you see some small circles and some larger circles suggesting there are some small colleges that are serving, have high proportions of their students in formal dual enrollment, and some large colleges as well. So I think that as next slide is my last slide, and Sarah, I will leave it up to you how much to spend time on this is for the discussion, because I'm sure there'll be other opportunities for this. Basically, we're trying to do a deeper exploration of sending high schools and receiving community colleges and their partnerships. I should just shout out here to PPIC, my colleagues New and Olga Rodriguez are doing important work on this, looking at the CCAPs, and so we're in conversation with them. We're also trying to understand what equity looks like in terms of not just access, but course types and post-secondary trajectories. How do these students fare if we track them over time? Do they stay enrolled? Do they stay at that community colleges? Are they more likely to enroll in four-year colleges? And then how does dual enrollment fit within a broader landscape of college preparation, in particular A to G eligibility, which we're also increasingly focused on strengthening, and CTE participation. I think I'll stop there and turn it over to you, Sarah. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Michal and Wheelhouse Partners. Really fantastic research, and as we know, really unique research in terms of, for the first time in California, taking a deeper dive into looking at what equity looks like in dual enrollment in California. What can we know about participation rates? In the interest of time, we are going to move along to the next section. Can advance one more too. Thanks so much. But I think that, but please do, folks, continue to put your thoughts on any of these topics and any questions in the chat. And the our colleagues from Wheelhouse can get to them during the presentation and or during the discussion section at the end today. So thanks so much. So turning now to the JFF Wheelhouse, the JFF report, sorry. I'm excited to share with you our recent research that really complements the excellent quantitative research conducted by Wheelhouse. What really look at what do we know about the factors contributing to the gaps for special populations? So really zeroing in on those groups that were mentioned: English learners, students with disabilities, homeless youth, and foster youth. So first I want to take a moment and introduce my team that contributed to the report and is going to be co-presenting this morning. My name is Sarah Hooker, an Associate Director in JFF's California office. And you're also going to be hearing momentarily from Sam Finn and Alice Rice, both of whom contributed quite a bit to the research and will also be speaking to the report. And our other co-author, Derek Nino, is our fantastic chat master who will be answering questions and leading discussion in the chat this morning. And finally, you had a chance to hear from our Vice President, Joel Vargas, already this morning. Go ahead and advance to the next. So this is the publication from JFF that we're speaking about today. This is a link to our new publication, and we are grateful for the support from the Stewart Foundation, where we looked at the potential of dual enrollment as a college transition strategy for special populations. And I mentioned the 4 groups that we really focused on and considered. We want to acknowledge that this is a sort of a strange super term, and there's not a perfect term to refer to these groups in the aggregate. And we don't mean to mask the significant diversity as well as intersectionality within and across these groups. However, we do know that each of these groups are called out for special funding, accountability, et cetera, in state and federal law. And they're also among the most historically and continually underserved by our education systems. While they might be thought of as small groups, we actually know that together they comprise up to 1 in 3 students in California's K-12 schools. So the rest of this slide just provides a little bit of information on what we did through this project, our process. We really sought to understand what is known about best practices for each of these special population groups at the high school level in terms of preparing for college readiness, and then at the post-secondary level in terms of promoting college success, and then investigate to what extent is dual enrollment being used as a bridge strategy, and could it be designed more intentionally as a bridge strategy for these special populations that we know are struggling in terms of post-secondary access and success. Want to mention that in addition to the interviews with districts and colleges recommended for their innovative practices and our great conversations with researchers and advocates, we did have a chance to engage a great community of practice in providing feedback on many of the recommendations included in the report. So really appreciative to everybody who participated in that process. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. And this slide, I just wanted to briefly pull up one more time. This is the research from Wheelhouse that Michal shared. We were so glad to partner with them on the quantitative piece of this work. Wanted to briefly share one more time what we're talking about when we're talking about the gaps in participation rates for special populations in California. The black line is all students, and this is percent of high school seniors or graduating seniors who had taken at least one college course in high school. And as you can see, by 2019, the all students line had gone up quite a bit, but there was still significant gaps for homeless, foster, English learners, and students with disabilities. Students with disabilities are the blue line, and they're actually the lowest group in terms of participation rate in 2019. And another thing that I find pretty alarming looking at this slide is the fact that the rates have not increased proportionally for English learners and students with disabilities in particular. So the gap is actually widening over time for these groups. So I will turn it over to my colleague Sam to talk a little bit more about what our qualitative research showed us about factors that might be contributing to those gaps.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all here today. Really excited to share what we've been learning about barriers and promising practices for special populations and dual enrollment. We're going to start off with a broad look at factors and practices that are relevant to all special populations, and then we're going to move on to the specific context and potential for each population individually. So the first factor that we see impacting participation rates for special populations in dual enrollment is the chronic underfunding of counseling and student supports across the state. This really affects all students, of course, but it has a disproportionate impact on special populations in accessing dual enrollment. The next factor is a culture of low expectations and a lack of support from important gatekeepers. We see that deficit mindsets in some school leaders, teachers, counselors, and support staff can lead to special populations being tracked into lower level courses and passed over for dual enrollment and other college transition opportunities. The third factor we see is simply uneven access to information as well as opportunity. Wheelhouse just showed us that a majority of dual enrollment takes place outside of formal programs, and special populations are less likely to have the college knowledge or social capital to navigate the complex dual enrollment process on their own. With relatively few formal programs, a lack of counselor capacity, and low expectations from many school staff, most students from special populations don't even get a chance to consider dual enrollment as an option. The fourth factor affecting participation is the disconnect between K-12 and college policies and supports. For all special populations, that discontinuity in programmatic support can constitute a really significant barrier. Finally, we found there's often insufficient guidance and support to mitigate the risks associated with dual enrollment. Some students and staff worry that a poor grade or a withdrawal on their college transcript could impact their future academic standing or financial aid eligibility. But the good news is these barriers are not insurmountable. There are a ton of great high schools and colleges showing us that special populations can absolutely thrive in dual enrollment. So let's go to the next slide and we'll take a look at the best practices at the top sites we see serving special populations. So all these top sites, these schools and colleges have a few practices in common. First, they include an expectation of college course taking for all at the high school level. Dual enrollment courses are presented as the standard for everyone, normalized and integrated into typical course taking pathways. The second best practice we see is intentional outreach. Top schools and districts provide proactive and in many cases multilingual outreach to students and parents about dual enrollment opportunities through a variety of mediums. We see in-class presentations, after-school info sessions, flyers, emails, you name it. Next, we find that it's often high-capacity counselors who are acting as champions and drivers of dual enrollment. Counselors are really key in guiding students through the complexities of the college registration process and often take charge of student outreach. Finally, we see that top-performing sites try to integrate dual enrollment into the school day and hold classes on campus, which is something that CCAP allows. This makes things a lot easier in terms of time and promotes equity by eliminating transportation barriers and scheduling conflicts that may come up after school. I'm going to turn it back over to Sarah now, who's going to start diving into population-specific findings.
Great, thanks, Sam. So we know this is a lot of information and we're trying to go through fairly quickly. Please do feel free to, again, to ask questions in the chat at any time. We're going to unfortunately do a fairly quick overview of findings that we saw for the different special population groups, but there's many more examples and much more detail in the report. So moving to English learners first, a unique dynamic that we found is that English learners are not even recognized as a subgroup in post-secondary education course. So the K-12 English language testing and reclassification process has no bearing at the post-secondary level. This can really lead to a very disjointed college transition process for students who have gone through K-12 schools as English learners, graduated high school in English learner education, and then have a completely different set of assessments and requirements upon entering college. We also see English proficiency being treated as a prerequisite for mastering rigorous content at both the high school and college levels. Unfortunately, this really impacts access to dual enrollment because high school English learners' schedules are often full of required support courses focused on English language development, which limits their ability to participate in rigorous college courses or CTE, electives, etc. Instead of this siloed approach, best practice research demonstrates the benefits of integrating English learning into all subjects, teaching it at the same time that you're teaching rigorous content, But of course, this requires teachers that have training in supporting English learners' language learning at the same time that they're teaching their content. We did see a number of promising practices related to English learners and dual enrollment, however, and we actually published a standalone issue brief on this topic for those who want to go deeper. It's specifically related to English learners. I will briefly mention that we saw sites that provide additional academic support to their English learners through designated study periods, in-class supports, or after-school tutoring, all meant to augment and support their performance in their college classes. Next, we also saw examples of districts promoting dual enrollment in high-value career pathways while students are still learning English to really tap into students' career interests and also start building a record of college course taking. For example, we saw districts using courses in cybersecurity, IT, and welding as high-value career areas that their English learners were very interested in. The last major promising practice we identified was bringing college ESL courses into high schools themselves and making these courses count for both high school and college credit. This is the innovative approach being taken by Mountain Empire, a small district in eastern San Diego County near the US-Mexico border, and Cuyamaca College. The high school implemented the college's ESL sequence through dual enrollment, and students are earning up to 15 college credits just by completing the dual enrollment English ESL sequence. And the highest level course is A through G approved. So to learn more about that, of course, you can go to the report. And I'll go ahead and move on to students with disabilities. With students with disabilities, I would say that unfortunately, for this population, across all the subgroups, we saw perhaps the greatest confusion and frustration related to how to serve students with disabilities and dual enrollment at times. Much of this can be attributed to the fact that there is a completely different set of laws and policies that governs disability rights in K-12 versus post-secondary, which can really impact willingness to recruit and serve students in dual enrollment. Even when students with disabilities have the chance to take dual enrollment courses, they may not have access to the accommodations they need to be successful. The onus is on students to self-identify at the college level as having a disability and provide documentation of their need for accommodations. However, high school counselors, teachers, and parents are often unfamiliar with how this process works and unable to guide students. As a promising practice, dual enrollment programs can provide personalized outreach and connection to college's disability student programs and services. This is what Reedley College has done, created a unique tenure track position in their DSPS office focused on dual enrollment students. This counselor reaches down to feeder high schools to identify students on dual enrollment rosters who have IEPs or other disability support plans, to meet one-on-one with them, arrange the accommodations they need in college courses, and start building awareness about how the community college supports students with disabilities. You can see other barriers listed on the slide, and of course, similarly to English learners, lots of barriers around teacher capacity and professional development, also around the IEP transition planning process. And one recommendation that we did see was raised by some of our interviewees as an option into the IEP transition planning template and process. It is hoped that this will prompt IEP teams to consider dual enrollment as a viable option for students with disabilities and work with college partners to expand their participation. And in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Alice to talk about foster and homeless youth.
Great, thanks, Sarah. So before we start on this slide, I really wanted to acknowledge that while we chose to link foster youth and young people experiencing homelessness in our report, they are distinct groups with unique needs, with foster youth overall receiving more funding and support as they are more established in policy over a longer period of time. That said, these two populations do face many of the same barriers, and there is a significant overlap, as frequent disruptions to learning due to school mobility and housing instability, as well as high rates of trauma-related mental health needs. So in more specific terms, the lack of stable housing was consistently cited as the primary challenge facing both homeless and foster youth in college transition years, with interviewees suggesting that affordable housing providers, shelters, group homes, and nonprofits should be brought to the table to search for comprehensive strategies that provide stability that youth need to pursue post-secondary education. Kind of along similar lines and related to housing, the nature of home placements, especially for foster youth, is a leading barrier, with students in the foster care system changing schools an average of 2.5 times between 9th and 12th grades. And really this means in dual enrollment programs that serve foster or students experiencing homelessness, they really need to take into consideration the potential risk for students who might need to withdraw from college courses due to circumstances outside their control. These considerations also include the subject of mental health, as up to 80% of students in foster care have significant mental health issues related to trauma compared to that of the general population. Further, college students experiencing homelessness tend to have higher levels of anxiety, depression, and stress than their non-homeless peers. Lastly, it's also important to note that overall, our interview findings are consistent with recent UCLA research documenting the need for increased coordination across education, housing, county and state child welfare and social service agencies, as well as community-based organizations. On the right hand of the slide, you're going to see some promising practices, and essentially these are key takeaways from interviews that we conducted with districts, colleges, experts over the last year. So those practices include providing a warm handoff between staff and programs serving foster youth and young people experiencing homelessness in K-12 and community colleges. And that really means utilizing those specialized liaisons, social workers, and other social service professionals focused on supporting foster youth and young people experiencing homelessness so that they can identify students eligible for programs and scholarships and really build those supportive relationships and connect students to campus resources. The next recommendation is really about incorporating dual enrollment into what's already existing as far as college transition programs for foster youth. Structured cohort-based dual enrollment opportunities can complement and enhance the impact of colleges' outreach programs for high school-aged foster youth and really enable students to begin earning college credit in a supportive and trusted environment. Lastly, we found integrating case management and wraparound support into dual enrollment programs targeting foster youth and young people experiencing homelessness was important to ensure that youth have the support needed to succeed in dual enrollment and that practitioners must coordinate closely with service providers and partner organizations focused on child welfare, mental health, housing, and other basic needs. The intensive case management approach is actually a core component of a really, really exciting pilot that is being designed at 3 community colleges with the support of John Burton Advocates for Youth, who is actually with us here today. Next slide. Great. So now we're going to move on to the recommendations portion of this presentation. And we're really talking about here, like how dual enrollment is a promising strategy to connect and maximize the reform efforts and equity agendas across California's K-12 community college systems. And the recommendation section was really developed with input from, again, population advocates and researchers across the state during one-on-one interviews, as well as through focus convenings for each population group where experts had the opportunity to have a curated conversation about steps forward. Leaders at the institutional and state levels are overall enthusiastic about dual enrollment's potential and have prioritized equitable representation. However, this report does demonstrate equity cannot be achieved without attention to the unique circumstances of all populations. So with that, I'm going to go through kind of some of our first recommendations related to high school and college partnerships. And they include establishing local equity goals for dual enrollment that include special populations needing to disaggregate data to address course-taking gaps, as students from special populations should be included in the conversation about equity in dual enrollment, and practitioners should likewise integrate data to understand the factors that contribute to that uneven participation we've been talking about. We also really need to equip dual enrollment practitioners to support students from special populations. And instructors need training that help maximize the potential of students from populations. Important topics include inclusive instructional design, trauma-informed teaching practices, strategies for supporting academic language development for English language learners, and accommodations for students with disabilities in college courses. Lastly,
Sorry, Alice. I think, yep, one more. Go back one before that, please. Thank you. I'm just going to jump in and move us to recommendations for state systems. Thanks so much, Alice, for all of the local recommendations, and do want to encourage everyone to please check out the recommendations in our report. In terms of recommendations for state systems, we did want to end here, considering the great audience and great group of participants we have with us today. We really wanted to focus on elevating examples of promising practices and partnerships that focus on access and success. There's a lot encompassed in this recommendation. We know that state agencies have important communication channels and convening power to share innovative efforts and dispel myths about who dual enrollment should serve, promote mindset shifts, and encourage a broader exploration of what can be possible for students from special populations given the right support. We also think that state agencies can have a role in providing field guidance about the range of programs, services, and funding streams that can be used for special populations in dual enrollment. For instance, we need to clarify legal obligations and special considerations related to serving students with disabilities in dual enrollment, and clarify what is allowable and fundable. Finally, guidance documents should also demonstrate the range of programs and funding streams in the K-12 and community college systems that can be used to support dual enrollees, including foster youth programs, basic needs centers, disability student programs and services, undocumented student resources, etc., and build aligned approaches to support their success so that when students enter college campuses, they already have a warm handoff to these important supports. And with that, again, we know this has been a quick presentation, lots of more information in the report, but I'm really excited and honored to be able to introduce Dr. Aisha Lowe, from Vice Chancellor from the California Community College's Chancellor's Office. You can see her bio on the screen and see her full bio, but we are really excited to work with Dr. Lowe in everything dual enrollment and equity strategy and vision for success. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Lowe for her remarks.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and good morning, everyone. I first just want to thank JFF and Wheelhouse for investing in highlighting dual enrollment and really magnifying the role that a strategy like dual enrollment can play and should play in closing equity gaps. As you have seen presented here, research has shown that dual enrollment can be an effective means of improving the educational outcomes for a broad range of students. But as you also saw today, dual enrollment is not currently being maximized in that way. It's not being maximized as a gap closing tool, which is really a missed opportunity. So certainly want to emphasize, that we believe strongly from the Chancellor's Office that dual enrollment is an equity strategy. It's not an enrollment strategy. Dual enrollment is an equity strategy, and it must be used to welcome students in, not weed students out, and it must be utilized to reach our most vulnerable youth and scaffold their pathway to completion, to degree, and to career. So as I consider the details in this dual enrollment report and the discussion about how to improve college transitions for students with disabilities, for foster youth, and young people experiencing homelessness, I saw themes that I recognized as pervasive across the field of education: low expectations, underfunded services, lacking partnerships, and poor alignment and coordination. But what struck me most was what I saw as really sort of a common theme across all of the barriers and promising practices that were presented, which is something a bit more ideological in nature, as Sarah was just talking about mindsets. And that is really a lacking ethos of customer service. So when we consider practices like providing students and parents information in a language they can understand, or making dual enrollment accessible by holding classes during the school day, or as was just talked about, as Alice was just talking about, ensuring a warm handoff so students don't get lost in the transition. When we really think about those practices, that's just good customer service. And so when we think about education in that way, and I am always pushing as an educational leader for us to think about education in that way, with this ethos of customer service, that we have the great privilege of serving students, that those students are our clients, and that we are responsible for ensuring high quality results for them based on their needs and their goals. That ethos, that mindset can transform all of our practices, not just for dual enrollment, but across the board. As I was listening to our presenters today and some of the promising practices they presented, the big aha for me was we need to do that across the board, not just for dual enrollment. So I think it's really important to think about the mindsets that underlie our practices, because as we all know, activity without purpose is futile. So one example that I'll hone in on from the report. So for example, when we think about English learners and how to approach their needs with this ethos of customer service, we really have to confront some underlying ideologies of linguistic ethnocentrism and nationalism that have been pervasive in the way that we consider, think about, and serve English language learners in our country. We have this strange dichotomy when we address English language development in our nation, where we value multilingualism, but often only when English is the primary language. But we can dismantle that thinking and shift to an ethos of customer service by seeing our English learners as highly capable students who come to us with learning and knowledge developed in their native language, who are often navigating complexities that have only helped to further develop them, not just as students, but as people. And we can instead focus on how to build bridges from the skills they have to the additional skills they need to develop. And I think it's a lot of what you heard within this report is about building bridges and making connections. So we see that in the promising practices presented in the report, examples of that were to enroll English learners in advanced college language courses in their primary language, or to bring college ESL courses to the high school. But again, when we think about practices like that are birthed out of this ethos of customer service, that students are capable, that they're highly able, and that we, as the institution serving them, we have to figure out how to bridge those gaps and help them be successful. So for the California community colleges, we are very interested in how to leverage dual enrollment as a gap closing strategy. Our dual enrollment programs are a solution that we need to further maximize to meet our equity, diversity, and inclusion call to action, to fulfill the tenets of guided pathways, and to achieve the goals of the vision for success. We have recently been working with JFF with some strategy sessions about dual enrollment, really thinking through how do we better maximize the potential of dual enrollment, and in particular, what role does our office play within that process? So there's great potential here, and we're really excited about the results of those strategies. We will be in the coming months and years rolling out additional guidance and support for the California community colleges in that process. But really imagine that. Imagine a process in which most students, if not all high school students, I would argue, are exposed to college early through dual enrollment. Imagine our most vulnerable youth considering college and career options, exploring their interests, understanding the path required to enter their career field of choice, and graduating high school with focus and purpose. And all of us who have gone to college know that is so important. We've all probably experienced ourselves or had other friends or family members sort of flounder in college when you don't have that focus and that plan. So just imagine the sense of purpose and confidence that that can give students as they enter what is an unfamiliar process when they go off to college, when we have begun their path early while they're in high school. We believe strongly that this is the potential of dual enrollment. It is one that will be particularly beneficial for the students we're focusing on today, our students with disabilities, our foster youth, our young people experiencing homelessness, and we would add to that also our students of color and our low-income students. I know we are short on time, so I will close with sort of a unified call to action for all of us that are on the line today. To really focus in on what is presented in this report and how we can actualize these recommendations, how we can dismantle these barriers and pursue these promising practices. So let's innovate the way we think about and implement dual enrollment to ensure that it is an effective tool for closing equity gaps. Let's utilize dual enrollment to automate and streamline the connections between high schools and colleges to guide students into college and career. Let's create solutions to those barriers and invest in those promising practices. We will certainly be doing so at the Chancellor's office, and we welcome your ideas and your partnership in that process. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Aisha. Fantastic. Really appreciate this strong call to imagine what it would look like. And I think that's exactly what throughout our work we loved that question in terms of thinking, what would it look like to design dual enrollment with the most vulnerable students at the center? So want to open it up now for questions, comments in the chat, and or if people want to come off mute in the last few moments, we'd love to get to hear some of how you're thinking about this. And would love to kind of ask the question, how has this discussion shifted your thinking about the meaning of equity in dual enrollment? And I believe, I don't know if I saw somebody raising their hand. Yes, Jorge, I'll take you off mute. Go ahead.
Just a question. I wondered if you were able to pull out from the English learner category the subgroup of kids that were designated as fully English proficient during high school. I ask because in our work with alternative schools, they are the largest number of young people who, for various reasons, wind up in alternative schools are the RFEPs, and they are also a group for which many of those schools are looking to dual enrollment to backstop the fact that they had barriers to engagement in college-going coursework because of their pathway to being redesignated.
Fantastic question. Yeah, I can address that briefly. So in the quantitative data, we were looking at students who were current English learners at any time in grades 9 through 12. So not the RFEP students who, during those years. However, I do think that we did hear in the qualitative interviews some discussion, particularly about long-term ELLs, particularly in some of the examples I cited related to the career pathway work. But I think another point that you called out that's really important and kind of a huge area for future research and part of this discussion is the alternative school dimension and the really important role of our alternative schools and some of the innovative work that's already being done there in terms of using dual enrollment targeted for special populations. Great points, thanks. Anybody else? Go
Hi,
ahead.
Sarah. Can I ask a question? Just a thought. I mean, I'm just wondering, I'm in the K-12 space, right? And I know we're really thinking right now about recovery and learning loss, and there's quite a bit of money in K-12 to think about how we support those things. So I'm just wondering, I mean, because we have everyone here that is sort of connected to this transition. like this is a great opportunity for us to think about what are the perfect levers for right now to focus on, because school districts are going to make decisions in the next 1 to 2 months about how to spend a lot of this learning loss dollars that they're getting. So just want to put that on the table because I think it's an opportune time for us to have a conversation about that.
Really appreciate that. I think that's a great note in terms of, and very actionable too, in terms of thinking about what action steps can be taken. And yes, absolutely, those stimulus dollars can be, and really in terms of calling out the focus on the students who've been the most impacted during the pandemic. And we know that a lot of those students are the same special population groups that we're talking about. And dual enrollment can be an excellent way to not only combat learning loss, but provide opportunities for acceleration. Really appreciate the action-oriented comments. Would love to continue discussing opportunities for state action. I know we're at time. Do want to say that to encourage you to check out the rest of the recommendations in the JFF report related. We also didn't get a chance today to deeply cover the recommendations for research and the research community. And also definitely all the great data and information shared in the Wheelhouse presentation and Wheelhouse report. We're so grateful to our partners at Wheelhouse and UC Davis and for co-hosting this event with us and for the incredible contributions to this work in this field as well. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Alice for the last word.
Thanks, Sarah. So to close, JFF, we really want to thank you for being here today. To learn more about our work in California in the support of systems transformation driving equitable outcomes for all Californians, please do see the link that will appear in the chat right now. Thanks, Sam. And do stay in touch. Thank you all.
Thank you.